I typically look at the dictionary first. And it describes ableism as discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. If we kind of expand that definition, one is that ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. Basically, if you're normal, you are superior to a person who has disabilities. And continuing with the definition, at its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. So it really focuses on the person being broken and abnormal and not typical. They can't do things. It focuses on the negative. Internalized ableism, just to summarize, is basically when the person with the disability takes that to heart. They believe they are broken and need to be fixed. They believe they're worthless. They can't do anything. They're just a burden on society. That is what internalized ableism is. And a lot of this is rooted in the medical model. Now let's look at another part that's rooted in the medical model. People with disabilities as inspiration porn. This is a somewhat new term, although it's not as new as I thought. It was first coined in 2014 by an Australian disability advocate who is now deceased. It has now been expanded to cover all types of portrayals of and uses of disabilities, and they share one or more of these qualities. It's very sentimental, or you're made to pity the person, to feel sorry for the person who has the disability. It may have a very uplifting moral message, and that message is aimed primarily at those without disabilities. And that disabled people are anonymously objectified. They're just things. Even if they're named, they're just objects for our pity and to make us feel good. And these depictions might mean well, but they can also be exploitive. And I have a quote, it says, like actual pornography, inspiration porn provides a kind of a superficial pleasure and gratification for the viewer while objectifying, often harming the most passive subjects being looked at. And in America, some of the disability advocates are very, very much against inspiration for porn and calling it out. And for those of us with disabilities, it's at its worst, I think it's bad. But then I think about if I'm someone with a disability and I inspire someone to take positive action, well, that's a good thing. Anyway, it's not easy to answer. So now let's look at a newer model, which is the social model of disability. This is very different from the medical model. So one, disability is seen as just one aspect of a person's identity, just like their race or ethnicity or their gender or any other characteristic. The problem is that there's a mismatch between the disabled person and the environment, both the physical and social environment. The environment creates the handicaps and the barriers, not the disability. So this is an important distinction. It's saying the problem does not rest in the person with the disability. They don't need to be fixed. We're disabled by society because things are not built to be accessible. Those are the barriers. And so the way to address disability is to change the environment and the society rather than to fix the person who's disabled. This is a really important point, the difference between these two models. And before I move on, I want to have some idea if you grasp the important differences between these two models. Hiras, may I call on you maybe to translate or summarize a bit? That might help. Sorry to put you on the spot like
Yes.
that.
Yes, Professor. Can I help you about this?
Should I go back up to the slide with the medical model and you can translate that, or how
Yes,
would you
yeah,
like to
sure.
do it? Okay.
Yeah, the medical model and then the social model. Yes. Should I start now? May I?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Halo teman-teman semua, selamat sore. Jadi di sini ada topik terkait medical model atau model medis, disebut di sini juga model pengobatan barat. Seperti itu teman-teman, di mana berdasarkan model ini atau pendekatan ini, disabilitas ini dipandang sebagai individu yang rusak, di mana harus kita perbaiki, harus kita obati agar kembali normal. Di mana kata normalnya ini yang menjadi permasalahan juga di sini teman-teman, karena ya kita nggak bisa pandang penyandang disabilitas ini sebagai orang yang tidak normal seperti itu. Nah, selain itu di sini juga disebutkan bahwa seringkali profesional, salah satunya yaitu pihak medis, beranggapan bahwa mereka lebih hebat daripada, lebih tahu segalanya gitu, kondisi si penyandang disabilitas daripada penyandang disabilitas itu sendiri. Seperti itu. Di mana hal ini bisa jadi bahan perdebatan juga, tergantung teman-teman. Menurut teman-teman, kira-kira dari kasus, dari ilustrasi, sorry Professor, could you please go to the next slide, the patient and the doctor? Yes. The patient and the doctor, about
Oh,
which who
to
is,
save time, I was just going to do the two models.
okay. Oke, baik teman-teman. Dari model yang lama tadi, model medical itu, lanjut ke ada model sosial. Di sini disebutkan bahwa disabilitas ini bagian yang tidak terlepas dari si individu gitu. Jadi nggak bisa dibedakan juga sama seperti ya etnis, ras, gender seperti itu. Nah, jadi di sini kita kondisikan disabilitas ini bukan sesuatu kekurangan, ketidaknormalan, tetapi merupakan bagian dari diri mereka yang seharusnya disesuaikan dengan lingkungannya, person in environment, orang atau individu di lingkungannya. Seperti itu. Kemudian dari social model ini berubah dari model medis tadi yang seharusnya merombak atau memperbaiki si individu menjadi merubah lingkungan dan society menjadi lebih aksesibel untuk penyandang disabilitas. Jadi bukan orang yang dirombak tetapi lingkungannya. Itu perbedaan dari model medis dengan model sosial. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Hiras, sorry for putting you on the spot there, but thank you. It's such an important point. I wanted to make sure that people understood that. All right, so let's move then to the moral model of disability, which is one you don't hear about as often. That in the moral model, disability has some meaning about the person's or the family's character, their deeds, their thoughts, and karma. And because of this, disability can carry stigma or shame or blame, particularly if the disability is seen as a mark of wrongdoing. But this third point, particularly, you rarely see it, that in the moral model of disability, disability can also be a sign of honor or faith or strength. Interesting that both of those very different views fit underneath the moral model. I had mentioned this earlier about language. Language is very important. It may not seem like it, but it is. And as I promised early on, we'll talk about person first and identity first language. In person first language, we emphasize the person or the group rather than the disability or the chronic condition. So we'll say something like a person with paraplegia or a person with diabetes rather than saying a paraplegic or a diabetic or whatever it might be. In identity first language, and I should mention too that identity first language really comes out of the social model. And what it does is that it deliberately puts the disability as the focus because it's trying to point out that it's society, like the social model says, it's society that disables us. It's not that the person with the disability needs to be fixed. But this also allows those with disabilities to claim their disability and choose how they want to be identified rather than leaving that to someone else who might use negative terms. And there is actually disability culture. So identity first language is an expression of disability culture. So they might say, I'm a blind person, I'm an amputee, I'm an autistic person. And when you're presenting, as I am, it is perfectly fine to mix the two of them, but usually you just want to say that in advance, that you acknowledge that there's person first and identity, and either that you're going to use one of them or both of them. Okay. On this slide, I have a graphic that at the top it says, geography can shape the language we use for disability. And it has 12 flags from 12 different countries and the different ways that they say person with disability or disabled person. The phrase at the bottom is the most important, and it reads, but it's always the person with lived experience's choice which language they want to use, whether it's person first or identity first. In Indonesian, and I will apologize sincerely in advance if I mispronounce these. Two of the ways people with disabilities are referred are orang dengan disabilitas. I hope to goodness I was close on that one. Or penyandang disabilitas. Please forgive me if I was not. I mentioned at the beginning that as a social worker, I was taught person first language. So I tend to say person with a disability. But again, then as the graphic states, whatever language you use should be based on the person with the lived experience. How do they refer to themselves? The next slide has just some of many examples of what is now viewed in America as negative disability language. And remember, as we started out too, one of the things we are really trying to do is to stop focusing on the negative. Stop focusing on what people with disabilities can't do and focus on the many, many, many things that they can do. And because language does matter, we want to try to remove those words and phrases that are negative. This first one, which is labeling by diagnoses, often happens in hospitals. Doctors and nurses and other professionals are talking, and they'll say the stroke in room 301, the Down syndrome guy over there. You're like not even a human being anymore. You've just been reduced to whatever condition or disability you have. We have very much, and this is not across the board. We still have, even in America, we have work to do. We want to stop using words like crippled or deficient or phrases like deaf and dumb. There are plenty, I can tell you, there are plenty of deaf people out there who are smarter than I am. Just because you are deaf does not mean you are dumb. One phrase that's still out there quite a bit, me personally, as a person with disabilities, I do not like this phrase. Differently abled. In Indonesian, it's, and again, I apologize if I mispronounce, difabel, difabel. I get the accent wrong. I am not differently abled. I just can't do some things because I have a disability. That doesn't make me differently abled. Think about that. We try to stay away from words like handicapped, impaired, special, retard. But I have to tell you too, medicine, Western medicine, still actually uses words like impaired and retarded. That's one of the problems. But they now have such a negative connotation that we are trying to get away from them. And with the deaf community, at least here in Hawaii, I can tell you that they don't consider themselves impaired. They simply communicate differently. They communicate through sign language, right? They speak or use a different language. You folks primarily use some version of Indonesian, and I understand there are many. I use English. We use different languages. People who are deaf use a different language, sign language. If you think about it that way, it gives a whole new, it's a very different way to think about it. We also want to try to eliminate phrases like suffers from, afflicted with, stricken with, or victim. And another term that a phrase that I absolutely cannot stand is wheelchair bound. I absolutely cannot stand that phrase to the point where I will write to a newspaper or I will call a television station if they actually use that term. And I will say, please stop using that. And I'll explain why. I explain to them why, and I give them alternatives for what they can use instead. So, what can life be like with a disability? Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of negatives. As I mentioned early on, regardless of whether your disability is visible or invisible, there's a lot of stereotyping. Well, they're just worthless. They can't do anything. They're damaged goods. In public, particularly if you have a visible disability, people just stare at you, just stare, like like you're a statue or something. And then some people really feel awkward and act very awkwardly around people with disabilities because they're not used to being around them. That's a problem. They're not used to interacting with people with disabilities. So they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So I'm just going to pretend they're not even there. I don't see a disabled person, nobody with a disability there. I'll just look away. So on the one hand, you have staring, and on the other hand, you have, oh, don't see anything. I don't see anyone. Particularly with an invisible disability, oh boy, do you get accused of things. You look fine, so obviously you're lying. I've had that one. You are just lazy and you're freeloading off the government. And people who say or write things like this, they don't think about the fact that when people with disabilities try to work, there's maybe inaccessible transportation or no transportation at all. The buildings are inaccessible. I remember being in Bandung and we went to Gedung Sate There was a beautiful ramp out front. Walked up the ramp, got to the front door. I believe you had to step over something, and then there was no elevator. So you had to take the stairs if you were going beyond the first floor. So what? Should you just sit out on the lanai? We call it porch or lanai, and do your work because you can't actually get in the building? No accommodations provided. Then you have the attitudes of others. You may be bullied. Also in America, in some places, it's legal to pay people with disabilities less money. So in America, in some states still, because of this subminimum wage, people who get assistance from the government actually get more money than if they actually went to work. So the government is keeping people basically on disability because they don't pay them enough to actually be able to live, which is ridiculous. But that's a whole other story too. And I better get moving on because I'm running out of time. And we talked about the stigma on the part of the person with a disability or others. They bring shame to themselves and the family. They must remain hidden. It's karma. You're cursed. You should have never been born. Oh, you're just to be pitied because, I feel so bad for you. And compared to those without disabilities, people with disabilities die up to 20 years earlier. They have more than double the risk of also developing conditions like depression, asthma, diabetes, stroke, obesity. They tend to have poor oral health. It's difficult for them to find accessible health facilities. Transportation is inaccessible or unaffordable. And you can see, particularly these last 2 points, no accessible health facilities, no way to even get there, how that's going to contribute to the fact that they can die 20 years earlier than anyone else. But there is some good news, hopefully. The World Health Organization literally just launched the Disability Health Equity Initiative less than 2 weeks ago. And the statement is that the World Health Organization Disability Health Equity Initiative aims to close the avoidable health gaps between persons with disabilities and the broader population. I haven't had a chance to look through this all, but the URL is included on the slides, so you get a chance to look at it more closely. And from the United Nations also, we have the rights of persons with disabilities, which can also serve as a model of disability, or at least how we deal with disabilities. This is from the 2006 convention. So it has been around for a while, and it's Article 3, the general principles of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The principles of the present convention shall be, first, respect for the inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choice and independence of persons. Next is non-discrimination. Then full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Next, respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. The next one is equality of opportunity, then accessibility. Next is equality between men and women. And then finally, respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities and their respect for the right of children and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities. And that's a lot of words to say that those of us with disabilities, we really just want to be treated like anyone else and have the same opportunities like anyone else. It took a lot of words and a lot of time and a lot of people to get to that. So this can be a guiding model for you of what to work toward in Indonesia and around the world. I found this quote from a journal article that came out last year about Indonesian law number 8 of 2016 concerning persons with disabilities. And I quote, "Even though there is a law, there is little knowledge and awareness among the public, including business actors. The responsibility lies with the government, but society itself also causes discrimination against people with disabilities. The government forgets that the government is the main authority in protecting human rights, which is a factor in human rights violations, because it is careless in monitoring and protecting people with disabilities." So it's great to have all these laws and things in place, but if they're not followed and enforced, which is a job of both the government and society, then they're basically worthless. So just briefly about climate change, disasters, disabilities, and sustainable development goals. There was a recent article in Harvard Law Today that states that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured in climate emergencies, including heat waves, hurricanes, and floods. I don't know how many of you know about the wildfires that occurred on the island of Maui in Hawaii almost 2 years ago now. They spread incredibly fast for a variety of reasons. There were 102 people who died as a result of those wildfires. We know that many of them were older adults. We know that some of them for sure were people with disabilities. I think that probably quite a few of them were people with disabilities. Even though those of us with disabilities are more likely to die or get injured, the problem is, one of the problems is we are systematically excluded from any kind of disaster planning and preparedness. And I have talked about this and talked about this and talked about this, and change is very slow. Also, then we have to think about the climate change that results in disasters can also increase the number of persons with disabilities and worsen the problems of those of us with disabilities. So on Maui, people, for example, who have a diagnosis of asthma, their asthma is a lot worse because of those wildfires that occurred. Right now, my throat is really scratchy. The volcano on Hawaii Island is erupting, and I am allergic to the volcanic fog, which is VOG. So it really gets me in the throat on that one. So, but there are all kinds of climate-related things and disasters that can lead people to become disabled or worsen the disabilities. We do have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but 5 of these Sustainable Development Goals are directly referencing disabilities. Number 4, which is quality education. Number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. Number 10, which is reduced inequalities. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And number 17, partnerships for the goals. But there are also 6 other goals that are implicitly linked to persons with disabilities through the mandate of leaving no one behind. So these sustainable development goals can also be a guide for your social work practice at the micro, meso, and macro levels, at all levels. Let me talk briefly about one thing that I just absolutely adore is something called universal design. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this. In this slide, I want to first bring your attention. I have a 4-panel cartoon, and it's a snowy day. There's a school. There's a ramp and stairs. The stairs and the ramp have snow on them. There are some kids waiting at the bottom. One child uses a wheelchair, and the maintenance person is using a shovel to get the snow off of the steps. And in the first panel, the child who uses the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" In the second panel, the maintenance person who's doing the shoveling says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." In the third panel, the child in the wheelchair says, "But if you shovel the ramp first, we can all get in." And in the final panel, the maintenance worker stands up and says, "I never thought about it like that." That is the essence of universal design. Everyone can use a ramp, but not everybody can use stairs. If we built everything with accessibility in mind, those things that we see as special, those accommodations, they benefit everybody, not just people with disabilities. This is another one of, to me, the most important points. So I go around telling people about universal design. So basically, it is, as I mentioned, you're trying to design and compose the environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of age, size, ability, or disability. This is buildings, products, services, everything. And there are so many things that we take for granted in our lives that were actually made originally for people with disabilities. Some of those are curb cuts. You know, in the curb, you have the dent, right? And ramps, barrier-free entrances and exits, and things like automated doors, lever-style faucets and door handles. Text-to-speech technology led to audiobooks, adjustable work services, and closed captions. That's just a small number of things that were developed for people with disabilities, but they benefit all of us. And imagine if every single thing we designed and built from this moment on was built with universal design. This would be an incredibly different world for every single one of us. We would all benefit. So What can we do? And I'm already over time, sorry, just a few more minutes. So, what can we do as social workers and other professionals? How do we support people with disabilities? A big thing for me is what I call being the gentle, squeaky wheel. I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase. In America, we have a phrase that says, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So, like if you're pushing a cart or something with wheels, there's a squeaky wheel. So you give it some oil, right? Or some grease so it doesn't squeak anymore. So we also take that to say that if you're someone who makes noise about something, you're going to get attention. But I say, don't be annoying, be a gentle squeaky wheel. The reality is, if you are angry, if you are scolding people, if you are yelling at them and telling them what they've done wrong, they're just going to shut you out. They're not going to listen to you. And that's not going to work, right? So you want to make noise and bring attention, but not be irritating. You gently, you kindly remind them about disabilities and people with disabilities. And you keep reminding them as many times as you need to. Now, you may need to be patient, but I can tell you it works. It does work. I've had it even at my workplace several years ago when we started talking about diversity and equity and inclusion. All they talked about was race and ethnicity. That was the only diversity. That was it. And I am not saying, believe me, I am not saying that race and ethnicity are not important. Of course they are. But there are so many other kinds of diversity, including disabilities, gender, sexual orientation, and more. And I just had to keep reminding them each time of that. And now, it took a few years, now they all remember. They already think about disabilities even before I say anything. It does work. But the other part to this is really important. You can't just complain and point out what's wrong. You also need to give people realistic solutions. What are things that they can easily do right now or in the near future? Because they don't know, and they're not going to go look it up themselves. So you gently and repeatedly point out the problem, but you also offer solutions. Very, very important. You need to learn about and keep learning about disabilities. I have sadly found that even some of the best trained social workers have had little to no content on disabilities. I currently don't regularly teach class, but I have interns. I have many interns. Many students with disabilities end up with me because they end up failing at another internship site because the social worker there has no idea what to do with them. They do not understand disabilities. They don't. And you want to keep learning about it and interacting with people with disabilities so you can help others and teach others and normalize it. This is normal to interact. To me, it's just a part of my life now. So yes, encouraging others to learn about disabilities and to keep learning about it. Also to learn about accommodations. There is a myth that accommodations cost so much money, but a lot of them are free or cost very little. How much does it cost to modify somebody's work schedule or give them flexible breaks. Nothing. Allow for telework and remote work. I'm at home right now. I'm not in my office. It's telework. I love my office. I love everybody at work. But oh my gosh, as a person with a disability, remote work is so wonderful. What about those of you who care for children, who care for your older parents, who care for people who are sick, or otherwise you need to go pick your kids up or drop them off? Flexible schedules and remote work are fantastic. You know what I tell my staff, and I tell my boss too? As long as the work gets done on time, it gets done correctly. Why do I care where they are and when they're doing it? It's done correctly and on time. Why do I care if they're at home or in the office or at the beach? What does it matter? What does it matter if they're doing it at 2 a.m. instead of 2 p.m. if it's done right and on time? And we can reach them when we need to. Then who cares? Things like ergonomic keyboards or lighting on a dimmer switch. As I get older, I need brighter and brighter light to read. They might need documents in large print. They might want to wear noise canceling headphones or earplugs. Even if you don't have a disability, if you're in a cubicle in an office, that can help you focus. But also they found that listening to music helps some people focus. Interesting. And you need to think about which model or models of the three that we talked about guide you. You really need to look into your heart and into your brain. What do you really believe? The medical model, the social model, or the moral model, or some combination? Does the Article 3, those general principles from the United Nations on the rights of persons with disabilities, do they guide you? Can they guide you some more? Checking your language. Are you using person first, identity first? Are you using negative and outdated words? And a reminder that when you're working with an individual with a disability, use either person first or identity first, whatever they use. And you can ask them what they prefer. And then working with a group, you can mix it up and explain your preference. When others use this negative language, you kindly point it out. Don't scold them. Kindly point it out, but also offer them options. So if they say, oh, that person is slow, they're retarded, I say, we don't use that term anymore because it's negative. So instead, we say intellectually and developmentally disabled. You know what? They might roll their eyes at you, but so what? Some people will roll their eyes, but some people will take it to heart. And as I basically mentioned earlier, there is no diversity, equity, or inclusion without disabilities. We see that so often here in America. It's all about diversity, but there's little to nothing about disabilities. And has also been mentioned by others, we really have to consider the intersectionality of disability status with all those other types of diversity. And as I mentioned earlier too, about the gentle squeaky wheel, to gently keep reminding people about disabilities and keep reminding them. As social workers, we can also help ensure that those of us with lived experience, the people with disabilities, their family members, their caregivers, other supports, are at the table when decisions are being made. There are too many times when decisions are made about people with disabilities with absolutely zero input from anyone with a disability. We now view lived experience as being just as valuable as top-notch research. They're both extremely valuable, but in different ways. We also want to, of course, advocate for those with disabilities but we also need to teach people how to advocate, people with disabilities, how to advocate for themselves. I can't remember what prompted this, but I think it was because I was having difficulty advocating for myself on something. I was having a lot of trouble. And I began to wonder if I, as a social worker, was having trouble, then people who aren't social workers or human services professionals, would they really know about how to advocate for themselves? And I looked online and I discovered there were tons of trainings for people who are professional advocates. I could not find a single thing about advocacy for just everybody else. So I developed a 1-hour presentation on the basics of advocacy, where I point out not only the problem, but give actual solutions that they can take away and use themselves when they're advocating for themselves and others. It has been really, really a good presentation. In America, too, we have another saying about not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. So basically, what we're saying is you can't just say that people with disabilities should have rights, they should this or should that. You also have to demonstrate it. We have a lot of instances where you'll have organizations talking about how they support people with disabilities, but do they have any employees with disabilities? Is there anybody on their board who has a disability? Nope, nope, nope. So you want to modify your job descriptions to make them inviting to qualified people with disabilities to apply and provide accommodations. That word qualified is very important. We're not just giving out jobs to people with disabilities because we feel bad for them. We're hiring people who are qualified for that job. It just so happens they have a disability. And you know what, if you don't invite people with disabilities, you could be missing an absolutely fantastic employee because of that. Somebody who could do great things for your organization. And my last one is network, network, network. When I was in Bandung in January, I was pleasantly surprised at how many organizations and individuals were involved with the rights of, advancing the rights of people with disabilities. But I also quickly realized that none of them knew anything about each other. Everyone was off doing their own thing, and they didn't talk to each other. So one of the things we did was try to bring those people together. As we met with them, we said, do you know about such and such an organization? You could potentially have a great partnership with them. Do you know about the School for the Blind? What about having some interns here at your company, School for the Blind? And you know what we heard time and time again? They said, oh, we just never thought of that. One of the things I do is network with everybody, every organization in the state of Hawaii, and actually have even moved beyond the state of Hawaii to network. There's so many resources out there, so much information, and people want to work with you. I have no compunction about reaching out to someone who I do not know and saying, hey, I'm, here from Pacific Disability Center. I saw this, etc. How about if we sit down and talk together, how we can help each other? And people are more than willing to do so across the country and now even internationally. Network, network, network. You are much stronger together than you are separately. Much stronger together than separately. I have some plans of action for you with the URLs. So you'll be able to look those up. And as I mentioned earlier, there are quite a few of them here in Asia and the Pacific. I've listed recent ones, and Indonesia is one of the leaders here. I have a bibliography too of some articles you can check out. The articles I referenced, the citations are in on the slides. And my last graphic shows a bunch of different looking people, short, tall, different skin color, different levels of disability. And our phrase here in America, for those of us with disabilities, is nothing about us without us. And my last slide is by way of easing us into the question and answer session. And it goes back to the title of my presentation. In Indonesia, all disabilities are invisible. Why do you think I gave this title to this presentation? For those of you who live in Indonesia or have visited, why did I title this, in Indonesia, all disabilities are invisible? And let me go ahead and stop my screen share. I'll be able to look at the chat too, and then we'll segue into the rest of the question and answer. And the slide before this has my contact information, but as I said, you will get a copy of the slides. Please feel free to contact me. I'm willing to help however I can. So I'll stop my screen share, and then I'll be able to look at the chat too. I know that I saw lots of things going in the chat. But would anyone like to venture a guess as to why I gave it this title? Oh, the summary is already out. Okay, here we go. Because we accidentally ended. It's okay if you don't speak English well. My
Okay.
joke is that your English is far better than my Indonesian, so don't feel embarrassed. And I'm sorry, I need to put my glasses on. Ibnu, Barisha, you would like to comment?
Okay, let me lower
Yes,
my hand
please.
first. Uh,
Okay,
don't worry, I speak English. So, so my question is all about your hello, Prof. Violet. It's nice
yes,
to meet you here.
nice to meet you
I'm.
too.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Ibnu Barisa. I'm a wheelchair user from
Uh,
Jakarta,
mm,
and your your slides, your PowerPoint describe me so much because I feel it so much in my real life. So my question is, how can I reach the the government or the social the ministry of social welfares? How can I reach the ministry of social welfares? How to educate them to encourage them to increase the accessibility for me, for us, the wheelchair users. Is there any same problem in the US?
yes, yes, there is. We're definitely not perfect here in the US, that is for sure. Um, and this is a really good point. I found this to be true both when I was there in January in Indonesia and last month. We
Yeah,
spoke with business owners, we spoke with members of like provincial government, local government. They understood. The problem was the people at the very top. They either didn't want to listen, don't want to listen, because again, they're working off of faulty data. They think that there's hardly anybody in Indonesia who has a disability. And it seems like, for what was explained to me, each time there's a new person in charge, they just work on whatever projects they want to. So there was, I remember, I think this was in Bandung, that one leader was really focusing on accessibility. But then when that person came out of office, the next person came on, they didn't do anything. And it was
Yeah,
really
it
difficult.
happens. It happens in throughout the nation. I think when the leaders change, the policy change also. That's the problem. How can we educate them not to change every policy that we had before and just continue with them if the policy is as good as we wish? So
I know, and that is the hard one. And to be honest, I've been thinking and thinking and thinking about this. But as I was putting together this particular presentation, one place to start is that first, you need to have far more reliable statistics. You do not have any statistics right now that back up what the scale of the issue. Now, unless you have someone at the top leadership who is already interested in disabilities, who will give the money for the study, I think really otherwise, more realistically, the organizations need to network and either pool their money, and I know money is incredibly scarce, so difficult to get some money to do a real study of people with disabilities to try to get at least some decent estimate of how many people there are in Indonesia that actually have disabilities. So there are no short-term solutions that I can think of. So this is obviously a bit of a longer-term solution. But to have you folks start to meet regularly, the different organizations, and work together on this to get a good number, then that's a starting place, at least for you. You have some evidence of the scale of this that you can take to the administration. Otherwise, honestly, they're just going to say, nope, they're just, 400 of you. There are 400 people in Indonesia who have disabilities, so why do I care about them?
I think we need to prove it, that we are people with disabilities. I think to educate them in especially in a group, in a community, to educate them to how to fulfill their their job as a government, to
Yes.
to um, to fulfill our needs as a disability, as a person with disability. So that's my problem. There's many more to come, but I will give the chance to the others. Thank you.
And thank you for that. And just to add to that, another thing that you can do that is more immediate is to advocate as a large group. People with visible and invisible disabilities, their supports, their family members, professionals, you make it so that they can't ignore you. In America, back in, let's see, the 1980s, I think it was, you literally had, and I may get the dates wrong, may have gotten the dates wrong, you had groups of people with disabilities going to the government buildings, in our case, to Congress. There is no ramp. There was no ramp at that point. People were crawling up the steps of Congress, people leaving their wheelchairs at the bottom and crawling up the steps, pulling themselves up the steps of Congress, all across it, big, wide steps. There was no way they could be ignored then. Going into the Capitol building, too, sitting outside, literally sitting outside of the legislators' offices, saying, you can't ignore us.
Yeah.
Now, you don't know, that's a risk. You don't know. You could get arrested. You could get carried away. That is
Yeah.
obviously a risk. But
That's the problem. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ibn Barisa. Thank you, Professor Violet, for your response. Okay, everyone, we will now move into our Q&A session. We will open for the verbal question first, like the previous one, Mr. Ibn. Anyone want to ask a question for Professor Violet directly? Because we already have some questions in the chat box.
Yeah, maybe we should take one from the chat and then we'll turn it back
Great.
over to live and go back and forth. I'll let you pick one, Hiras.
Okay, the first one is from Jeremias Wutun. I agree on how important data is in driving policies and programs. Most importantly, social workers and relevant organizations must advocate for empowerment programs that enable persons with disabilities to gain equal access of services. It is also crucial to monitor the implementation of policies to ensure access to decent livelihoods, education, healthcare, employment, and other fundamental rights. It is not a question, I guess, but would you like to respond that, Professor Violet?
Yes, yeah. Agreed for sure. Yes, thank you for that. That statement, I guess, really is what it is. Unless did I miss a question in there? I apologize if I did.
Okay, should we go next? Okay, from Dina Ayu. Even though they are part of our communities, they are often kept at home, not included in public spaces, and not talked about. This can be because of stigma, shame, or a lack of understanding about disability. It responds to your questions about why did you choose that title.
That's right. When in January, when I got to Bandung, we took whoosh over from Jakarta, and I checked in to the hotel. There was a grocery store right next door, and I wanted to walk to the grocery store. So I came out, and the hotel staff said, "Oh, miss, would you like a taxi?" And I said, "No, I'm just going to walk to the grocery store next door." And I could tell, I mean, they were still smiling, but I could tell the look on their face was like, she's going to walk? So getting just that short distance from the hotel entrance to the grocery store, I had to walk through an active driveway where cars were coming in. There was no sidewalk. It wasn't very wide. And I was the one who had to get out of the way because those cars were not going to get out of the way for me. So I felt so relieved. I finally got to the sidewalk in front and I felt so relieved. So I took a few steps toward the grocery store, and it was a pretty wide sidewalk, but there are scooters parked on both sides. Suddenly I had only a tiny bit of space to try to walk through the scooters. and past the food stand and past the people who were sitting there on the sidewalk who were eating. And I got to the grocery store, literally just a few steps, and I couldn't figure out where the entrance was. How did you get in if you were walking? I was standing right by where the cars go in, which is a ramp that goes down, and it had a gate, an arm that comes down. And I thought, I don't know, how do I get there? So I just looked to make sure that no cars were coming, and I ducked under the gate and quickly got off the ramp. On the way out, I saw there were steps. I finally saw them. No handrail. So I was trying to hold on to, there was this metal arbor. I was trying to hold on to that. But as I got to the top, I couldn't hold on because scooters were blocking most of it. And just as I was about to step onto the top step, a guy in the scooter puts a giant bag of trash right in front of me. And I knew immediately that's where I got the title. In Indonesia, all disabilities are invisible. You just don't see people with disabilities because it is so difficult to get around. Transportation is so lacking or almost non-existent. Jakarta is a little better, but not too much. And I thought that's why you never see or rarely see anyone with a disability, because it is so incredibly difficult to get around here. And I'm sorry I talked too much. I saw that the session is extended, but please, I understand if you do need to leave.
Thank you, Professor Violet, for addressing and telling us about that. Now, the next questions here we have Miss Dina Ayus raising hand.
Okay,
Please
thank you,
feel free to
Shiraz. Hello,
ask.
Prof.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, Prof. Violet. I want to ask some about the gently suki wheel. It inspired me actually. But how can we as social workers working in institutions using both the medical and the social models together in a way that support the meaningful participation of children, a youngster, and the person with disabilities? Because disabilities is not for the young, for the persons, but the children and the youngster too, but they cannot voice their rights and etc. And then we're also practicing gentle and effective advocacy. That's my first question. Actually, I have the second questions. And in addition, me and my partner Lutfi is from Association of Social Worker with Disability in Indonesia, or APSDC, has just forms for this year's. Maybe you can give us some advice, maybe just 3 pieces of case advice for us. Or what you give to social workers in Indonesia and to APSDC to help us to improve our works and support people with disabilities better. Thank you.
I think I can, or hopefully answer both those questions in one. I practice all the things that I shared with you. As a person with a disability, I come out readily and admit that. So I serve as a model as a person with a disability to show others what life can be like, those who are afraid to say that they are. So first, I stand as a model, both as a person with a disability and as a social worker. And that gentle squeaky wheel, I use that everywhere. Now, I'm at the School of Medicine, and even though in America, if despite the fact that 20 to 25% of doctors' patients have disabilities, there is so little education on disabilities in a medical school. This to me was absolutely astounding. As I looked into the problem more, I realized rather the same thing with social workers, that the medical school teachers, the professors, they themselves knew very little about disabilities. So there was no way they could pass it on to their students because they didn't know themselves. And we have the same issues here in America, where a lot of people with disabilities just don't go to the doctor because they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to treat them. And so I have been being the gentle squeaky wheel and bringing this to the attention of those who oversee the curriculum at the medical school. And we also had 2 students who were particularly interested in disabilities. My supervisor got me in connection with them. We now have a disability elective class that I we don't really teach it, but one of the professors in, what am I trying to say? He works with children, pediatrics. One of the professors in pediatrics who works with children with disabilities and we sit in and advise the class, but it's run by the students. We also now have a disability certificate of distinction that students can take. And we're now working to get it infused into the curriculum. But it really did take being that gentle squeaky wheel and reminding them time and time again about disabilities. But most importantly too, what can they do about it? And how can I help that? So I realized that one of the ways that I can help is to help both the professors and the students. And I'm working on putting together a manual that has just 1 or 2 pages about some of the more common disabilities, and we can expand on it. And also, what are the accommodations? Because we have medical school students who have disabilities. They often struggle because they don't get the accommodations they need, or they have professors who think because they're disabled, they're never going to be a good doctor, so they try to get rid of them. So if I can, write something up that's quick and easy, that the professor or the student can go see, okay, here's a little bit about this condition, and here are some easy accommodations that we can offer to students. That's the other big thing that I do. I try to identify the gaps. Where are the gaps and how can I fill those? Another example is we used to have a contract with the Department of Health, and part of that contract was to go out all around Hawaii and talk to the general public and professionals about brain injuries, strokes, and spinal cord injuries. And I realized, as someone who networks, that there was so much that people, even professionals, had no idea about. We have this amazing project in Hawaii called Telestroke, which has saved countless people's lives or saved them from becoming disabled. And I talked to hundreds of people across the state. Not a single person knew about it. So what did I do? I got together people I network with from 2 hospitals. We got some funding and we got a producer. We wrote up a script and we did a half an hour on stroke signs and symptoms and telestroke. And you'll get, when you get the slides, you'll get a link to our YouTube channel and the video is on there. And I'm so proud of that video. And so many people have come to talk to me about that afterwards. So that was one way I filled in, but I also started a free online monthly newsletter. I already get so much information about brain injuries and stroke and spinal cord injuries, But for the regular person or even professionals, it's an overwhelming amount of information. So I collate all that every month into what opportunities there are, most of them free, what articles. I have a list of support groups throughout the state because people become disabled. They have no idea where to turn for help. Even the professionals don't know about all the support groups. So the newsletter has all the support groups and other kinds of things. That's free. I put it together. I send it out monthly. It now even goes to places like to other states like Colorado and Nebraska, who I've made networking contacts with. So I really focus on where are the holes or the gaps. We call them pukas in Hawaii. And how can I fill it in? Or how can I work with somebody else to fill those gaps? It takes time. These are not going to be instantaneous. They take some time, but you would be surprised at how much of a difference you can make in just a few years. I also go out and I do tons of presentations, free presentations for anybody who wants them, like this one. And I have many others that I do too. So find out where your pukas are in your communities and how you can fill them. Hopefully that answered both questions, I hope, because you can do this at an individual level and at a group level. And I know one of the closing things was that for me to give something inspirational. And I really thought about that, and I thought, I want to say that each of us is far more powerful than we realize, both in our individual personal lives and our professional lives. We have much more power and control than we actually realize. On a personal level, you want to focus on the things that you have control over in your life. Too often we focus on the negative and what can't be done, the things that we can't control. But if you shift that mindset and think about what can I control, it becomes a whole different picture. You can't ignore those other things, but focus on the things you have control. So many of our social work clients feel like they have no control or they have lost control and they're lost. So we want to help them to show them what are the things that they can control in their lives. That is extremely helpful. But the same is true as a group. As a group, you are just so much more powerful than you realize. You have so much more power, but it's getting together and realizing that and planning. I am the chairperson for the State of Hawaii Disability and Communication Access Board, and I've been chairperson for a few years now. And I am even just now realizing how much power I have and how much power the board has. I didn't even realize this. We are doing so many good things, but I am realizing that we can do even more. And since I started to realize that, we've gone to the airport twice and toured around and offered suggestions on how they can make the airport better for people with disabilities. In our state, fortunately, we're lucky. We have a governor who is very receptive to us. I actually have the governor's cell phone number. I can call up or text the governor and he responds. Now, I understand that's not the same in Indonesia, but you may have some politicians, some leaders who are receptive. Reach out to them. talk to them, meet with them, help them to help you. So we're doing a lot of things with the politicians right now around individuals who are homeless, who have brain injuries, which is something I've been talking about for several years, that we are not going to solve the problem of homelessness unless we address the fact that potentially half of the people who are homeless or even more have a brain injury. And if you do not pay attention to that, you're not going to come even close to solving the problems around homelessness.
Yeah, agree. Thank you, Prof. Violet. And then for the support group is for the person with disability or the social worker who focus to the disability issue.
Some of them are social workers, some of them are
Okay.
nurses.
Ah,
It really depends. So it could be a variety, but I know for the support groups in Hawaii, I know everybody who leads those groups. There are some online groups that I include that are because the meetings are virtual. Some people, it's difficult for them to leave their house, but I make sure I check it out first to make sure that support group is reputable before I add it to my list.
okay. Thank you, Prof. Violet. Heres.
And if
Thank you, Miss
anyone would
Gina.
like to, subscribe to that newsletter, just send me an email and I'll add you to the list.
Okay, thank you, Professor Violet. We have next question here. Because of the limited time, let's go next to Miss Hastin Trustisari. The question is, what are different challenges of disability services in developed and developing countries? And what are your opinions about preparing transition from school to adulthood in multiple disability education? Please.
I have been fortunate to travel a lot, a great deal in America, but also internationally. I feel extremely fortunate. On Asia and Pacific, I've been to Japan and China, South Korea, looking more broadly, Australia, New Zealand, also to Hong Kong, not just mainland China, but Hong Kong too. And it's really interesting. It's even in some place, even let's take Japan for an example. In some ways, Japan is even ahead of us in terms of disabilities than America. But in other ways, they're behind us. Then I went to South Korea and it was a little worse. And then I went to China and accessibility was even worse than that. Accessibility was really difficult in China. I came to Indonesia. There are a lot of issues here in Indonesia. Pretty much everything. There will be little tiny glimpses of accessibility, but overall, there's a tremendous lack of disability. At the hotel that I was, someone else made the travel arrangements when I came in January to Bandung. The hotel had a ramp out front. Fantastic, a ramp, not just stairs. The stairs had no railing. The ramp also had no railing, and it was incredibly short and steep. I had to like hang on to the wall to get down. And it suddenly dawned on me that this ramp was not meant for people with disabilities. This ramp was meant for deliveries. That's why there was a ramp. It was so people could make deliveries, not for accessibility. And last month, when we were at the university doing the social work conference, I was a plenary speaker and we had to get on stage. Both sides of the stage had steps with no handrail. So I actually had to have a student who held my hands and went up the stairs holding my hands first so I could get up and down. If we think about universal design, and I know I'm getting a little bit off track, Why couldn't one of those stairs be a ramp? Why did it have to be both stairs on both sides? A simple thing like putting a ramp on the other side, poof, accessible with a handrail, and the steps with handrails. I think I probably got away from whatever the question was. I'm sorry, now I even forgot what the question is. I got off on a rant there. Developing countries too. So I haven't really been to, I apologize, I haven't really been to developing countries, but I know one day we spoke with a professional fellow who was from Timor-Leste, and she was saying that the infrastructure there was even worse than in West Java. There's basically no accessible transportation whatsoever. The roads were so bad. So really it was invisible disabilities. If you had any disability where you could not take yourself out, you needed transportation or help, you were never going to see those people because they were pretty much going to have to stay home because it was physically impossible for them pretty much to go anywhere unless they somehow could drive, they could afford a car and drive, or had a driver to take them around or someone to help them. They weren't going to go anywhere. And the second question was about transitioning. I don't know about in Indonesia. We have special services in every state that help students with disabilities transition from school to work or to whatever comes, or more school if they like. And they actually begin working with students with disabilities while they're still in school, as young as age 14. So here in America, we have a system in place. It's called Division of Vocational Rehabilitation here in Hawaii, and I actually work very closely with them. But they help the transition. But there are also parents and other organizations that we have here in America who assist with that transition. But it's wonderful, but it's not perfect. There are success stories, but the system is not perfect even here. Unfortunately, there are plenty of stories where there is not success. And I work closely with vocational rehabilitation to try to increase the numbers of those who are successful, who go through the program. That is something long-term we've been working on. We've made some gains recently, but we still have a long way to go. So even developed countries are still often very sorely lacking in really adequate, successful services for people with disabilities. So I know we're already pretty late.
We have the last questions here, Professor.
Yeah, maybe the last one. And again, you can always feel free to email me.
Yes, the last question is from ULT, Pajajaran University. Professor Violet, are there any boundaries for social workers in providing services to clients, especially those with disabilities, or providing information about disabilities themselves? Please, Professor.
Okay. Sorry, you cut out a little bit, but I think the question was about if there are any boundaries. Is that correct? Okay. Really, at least in America, and I would think this is pretty much everywhere, really the biggest boundary is not having an inappropriate relationship with the client. There is the power differential. You as the social worker have the power. Client has less power. Personally, I find best that it works best to work as equal partners. So you think about that, work as equal partners. The person with the disability is the expert in their life. You, as the professional, are the expert in the profession. It takes both of you, and perhaps others too, to be a part of this. So rather than the boundaries, again, inappropriate relationship, no, obviously. If you treat it as an equal partnership where both of you have valuable content and you work together toward the goals, then you're probably going to be okay. You're going to, in my opinion, have a much better chance of success. This is also a newer model being taught to medical school students. We talked about the medical model where there's such a power imbalance. The doctor is the expert, you are not, so you just shut up and listen to what the doctor says. I don't work well with that model. The newer medical students are being taught that it's a two-way street, that if you partner with the patient and treat them with respect, the patient treats the doctor with respect, the doctor treats the patient with respect, and you're in a partnership. It's pretty amazing what you can get done by that. It's just incredibly different. I mentioned my orthopedic surgeon, my first one, he very much believed in the medical model. And I was just some dumb person there with bad knees who just needed to shut up and do what he said. It was extremely rude. I finally left him. I went to another doctor who is a graduate of our medical school, who was taught with this new model that is a partnership. Amazing difference. From day one, he helped me. From day one, he listened to me. He said, "What do you need help with?" And we worked as partners. I used to weigh more than I do now. I weighed too much to safely have the surgery, what they considered safe for surgery. He patiently waited and helped me for 2 years till I lost 100 pounds, and then I could have the surgery. Sadly, I've gained a lot of weight back, so I got to work on that. But he never condescended to me. He never treated me badly or dismissed me. It was such a wonderful experience. Now, both in medicine and social work, sometimes you're going to have clients who want you to tell them what to do. So you're going to need to figure that too. You're going to need to work around that. Especially older adults were really taught under that medical model. You never talk back to the doctor or the teacher or the social worker. That's rude and disrespectful. But the reality is that as a patient, as a client, you have rights. You have rights. There's a difference between respectfully asking a question to get information and challenging someone. Those are two different things. That's one of the things I talk about in my advocacy talk. You have a right to ask questions. You're trying to gather information so you can make the best decision for yourself. You have the right to ask those questions. You don't want to be rude or disrespectful, and you don't need to be. And I can go on and on and on, and I better just shut up because we're already so over time. And I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you, Professor Violet, for your response. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, all participants, for your thoughtful questions and active engagement in today's discussion. I am certain many of you would still have more questions to ask. However, due to time constraints, we unfortunately need to bring this Q&A session to a close, but we are free to ask Professor Violet through email, and don't forget to subscribe the YouTube channel though. Before we move toward the closing of today's session, may I kindly invite you, Professor Violet, to share a brief reflection or closing statement for our audience here, please.
Yeah, that's the one I sneaked in there before about the power that we have as more power than we realize, both as individuals and in groups. That was my statement for that. So I kind of sneaked that in there earlier. You know, with the questions too that are in the chat, if you want to compile them and email them to me, I can write some answers and then you can send out the answers to everyone via the questions and answers to everyone via email.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Violet. Whew. Allow me to briefly summarize some key takeaways from today's presentation and discussion. We already discussed and listened to the presentation about the definition of disability, the statistics, the medical model, the social model, and the moral model of disability. And then we have language matters, life with disability, the rights of person with disabilities. And then we have connected about the climate change, disaster, and SDGs with disabilities. We discussed about universal design, and my favorite also here about the gentle squeaky wheels and some of the quotes learn about and keep learning about disability, advocate for those with disabilities, but also teach them how to advocate for themselves. It is relevant with our motto here in my school to help people to help themselves. And then network, network, network. And don't talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Provide accommodation. Okay then. As we come to close of this inspiring and meaningful session, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Violet for so generously sharing her expertise, insights, and passion with us today. You have enriched our understanding of the evolving landscape of social work practice with persons with disabilities in a globalized world. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Puji Pujiono, the president of IPSPE, for delivering the opening remarks that set the tone for today's session. And also like to thank him for kindly recommending me to serve as the moderator for this lecture. Likewise, my appreciation goes to Mr. Muhammad Lutfi, the chairperson of APS-DC, for his insightful welcome remarks, providing an overview of the Indonesian context regarding the role of social workers in supporting persons with disabilities and for introducing his associations. And to all participants, thank you for your active engagement and thoughtful questions throughout the sessions. Your contributions have made this dialogue all more dynamic and enriching. And of course, last but not least, our deep appreciation goes to the organizing team for their hard work and dedication in making this event possible every month. Every month. Okay, now I will hand this session back to our Master of Ceremony, Ms. Suhaila. Thank you, everyone, and see you.
All right, thank you to our moderator and speakers. What an engaging and insightful session we just had. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of Social Work International Lecture Series, I want to take a moment to say thank you from all of us on the organizing team to each and every one of you. Today's session was a powerful reminder of why we gather to advance disability inclusion. Through the voices and insight of our speakers, we were reminded that supporting persons with disabilities goes beyond access and protection. It is also about restoring dignity, building resilience, and ensuring full and meaningful participation in all areas of life. Our deepest appreciation goes to Professor Violet A. Horvath for sharing invaluable global perspective and lesson from the Pacific Disability Center at the University of Hawaii. A heartfelt thank you to our moderator, Hirasmando, for skillfully guiding the conversation with clarity, warmth, and care. We also extend our gratitude to Dr. Puji Pujiono, President of IPSPI, for opening today's session with thoughtful and inspiring reflection, and to IPSPI for its ongoing leadership in strengthening the social work profession in Indonesia. To Mr. Muhammad Lutfi, thank you for setting the tone of today's dialogue with a compelling call to action grounded in right-based social work practice. And to all our partners, especially the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Indonesian National Council of Social Welfare, and our collaborating universities, thank you for your continued support and shared commitment to inclusion. A special thank you to our sign language interpreter and language interpreter for your essential support in making this space more inclusive and accessible for all. And most sincerely to all of you, social workers, students, academics, humanitarian workers, and beloved member of the disability community tuning in from Zoom and YouTube. Thank you. Your presence today is a quiet act of courage, a loud declaration of care, and a beautiful reminder that we are not alone in this journey toward a more inclusive, dignified, and compassionate world. Before we close, we'd like to invite everyone to join us for a quick documentation moment. Please turn on your camera so we can take a group photo to mark today's meaningful session. Everyone, please turn on your camera. All right, I will lead the photo session. Miss Disha, please help me. 1, 2, 3, smile. Once again, 1, 2, 3, smile. All right, thank you everyone. But wait a minute, we have final announcement for you guys. If you'd like to revisit today's discussion, the recording will be available on the IPSPI YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with your colleagues and networks. For those who wish to receive an e-certificate, please make sure to fill out the attendance form, which has been shared in Zoom chat box by our organizing team. We are also excited to announce our next international lecture series session taking place next month on Wednesday, 30th of July 2025 from 7 until 9 p.m. Jakarta time. Our featured speaker will be Dr. Patricia Welch Selby, PhD, MSSA, an expert in international classification of functioning, disability, and health and chair of the Department and Director of Social Work at Bradley University, USA. Please stay tuned through IPSPI social media for many updates. With that, we officially close today's event. May today's conversation stay with you, inspire your work, and strengthen our collective commitment to justice, compassion, and solidarity. Thank you everyone. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Suhaila,
warahmatullahi
thank you, Professor Violet. Thank you, Hiras.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
for all the participants. See you next month.
See you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. See you next month.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day,
Okay.
everyone.
Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Once again.
Bye. I have to get up very early, so I better go to sleep.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank
We'll
you,
be in touch.
Professor Violet.
Once
Good
again,
night.
thank you.
All right, I will end it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
See
you,
you.
Mbak Disha.
Thank